Kia ora koutou, no mai haere mai. We are here to talk about the draft Land and Water Regional Plan for Otago. So if you're not here for that, then you might be in the wrong place. We will just begin with the karakia from Lloyd McCall. Lloyd, you're on mute.
Good start, thanks, Fleur.
Okay.
Karakia Timata, Tuiki Ronga, Tuiki Raro, Tuiki Waho, Tuiki Roto, Tuiki Te Haere Tangata, Rongo Po, Rongo Fiol, Hormie, Huie, Taikia.
Thank you.
No mai haere mai, ki te kia koutou, ki te hui hui mana. Welcome to this Whakahui. I'm Lloyd McCall, I'm the Deputy Chair of the Regional Council. Probably more importantly, I represent the Molyneux Ward. I live in Tapanui, and I chair the Policy and Environmental Science Committee. So I'm here to listen in. Thank you all very much for coming along, and we're just really here to get your feedback so we can continue on our pathway of developing our land and water plan. So I'll just hand you back to Fleur. Thank you.
Kia ora, thanks, Lloyd. Ko Fleur Matthews tōku ingoa. I'm the Manager of Policy and Planning at Otago Regional Council, and I'll kind of be introducing stuff today. We might just start by introducing all the ORC councillors and staff and our mana whenua partners who are in the room with us. So you've already heard from Lloyd, but I'll get everyone else to introduce themselves. So I'll begin with Councillor Noon.
Thanks, Fleur. So Andrew Noon, Dunedin constituency councillor based in Dunedin. We have a family sheep and beef farm at Waikowari. It's good to be here and great to have a good turnout. Cheers.
Awesome. Next, Councillor Somerville.
Kia ora koutou, Alan Somerville here. Yes, also a councillor in Dunedin, and here I think to be listening today. Thanks.
Thanks. And we've also got Councillor Wilson, Kate Wilson, on the line, but she's otherwise occupied just now, but she'll be here listening in, no doubt. I don't think there's any other councillors, but it's actually very difficult for me to tell on this. So if you're there, sing out now and introduce yourselves. All good. Next, I'll move to Sandra.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Sandra McIntyre. I work for Okaha, who in my role is essentially helping represent iwi in this work with ORC. I'm a planner.
Awesome, thanks. And Evelyn, if you're there, do you want to introduce yourself?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can, thanks.
Thank you. I was just dropping a little note to Tom just to say I'm juggling clinic, children and patients at the same time. So if I go blank for a bit, that's what's happened, is I'm suddenly in the other room. I'm a practitioner, health practitioner living in Clyde, and the health of the Manuheta Kia is very much in my heart. Thank you.
Okay, Matt Horton.
Hi everyone, I'm Matt Horton. I'm the Project Manager for the Land and Water Regional Plan.
Amber.
Kia ora, my name is Amber Smith. I'm a Policy Analyst in the Land and Water Regional Plan here at Otago Regional Council.
Amir.
Kia ora everyone, Amir Levy, groundwater scientist at ORC.
Thanks. Delina.
Good morning, I'm Delina Lee. I'm Senior Policy Analyst with the Land and Water team here at ORC.
Felicity.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Felicity Boyd. I'm a planning consultant helping ORC with the land and water plan.
Lisa.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Lisa. I'm part of the communications team at ORC. So if you're watching, thank you very much for being engaged. I live at Purakanui on the beautiful Otago Peninsula.
Nice. Oh, Maria, I just see that you're there. Maria Bartlett.
Oh, kia ora, I'm Maria Bartlett, working for Te Ao Marama representing Otago Community Hiku, and well, working for them and with them, and I've been on the journey in this plan development with ORC. Also live in Tapanui with Lloyd. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thanks. Where are we up to? Oh, the Toms. Tom Dyer.
Kia ora. My name's Tom Dyer. I'm the Science Manager for Otago Regional Council.
And Tom. You're on mute, Tom.
Kia ora. I'm Tom de Balsmaker. I'm the team leader of Freshwater and Land in the policy team. And so that team is developing this new land and water plan.
Thanks. Have I missed anyone that's an ORC staff member? Oh, Mark.
Yeah, kia ora, Mark Crawford, land soil
thanks.
scientist here in the regional council team.
Thanks. Sorry, we've got quite a crowd here, so it's fantastic. It's quite hard to see who's here and who's not. Thanks for listening to us about who we are and who's here. We've got a good range of people who hopefully will be able to answer questions as they come up. Just in terms of housekeeping, if you've got a question, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. Probably while we're doing the presentation part, maybe just put the questions in the chat so we can kind of keep moving, and then we'll come back to them at the end. We are recording the session. That's primarily for our own purposes, but it might we might publish it on the website, so just be aware of that if that's a concern for you. The chat will be moderated by Matt Horton, and yeah, we'll just kind of keep things moving and keep us to task. Okay, so just in terms of the agenda for today, I'll be giving a brief overview of what the Land and Water Regional Plan is for, where we're at in the process, and what this round of community engagement is all about. And then I'll pass on to Tom, who will provide an overview of the draft provisions, and then we'll be opening up the floor for questions. There is more information on our website, which many of you hopefully will have had a look through, but if you want, you can kind of follow along, maybe on another screen or something as we go, so where there's kind of a lot more information on the website about the specifics. We'll just be kind of giving a pretty high-level overview today. Cool. So this slide just sets out the national and regional legislative framework that we're working under to develop the Land and Water Regional Plan. So under the Resource Management Act, there's 3 types of national instruments that are relevant to regional freshwater planning. So that's the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, National Environmental Standards for Freshwater, and the Water Conservation Orders. Just in terms of how we got here, so in 2019, the Minister for the Environment told us that we could do better to manage Otago's lakes, rivers and streams, and directed the Otago Regional Council to prepare a new regional policy statement and a land and water plan to do that. Then in 2020, the government introduced revised national instruments, which created quite a paradigm shift for freshwater management, and set out quite prescriptive requirements about what was required in regional planning. So ORC began by preparing a new regional policy statement, which is that kind of next level down. And a regional policy statement just sets out kind of the the high-level strategic issues for the region and how we might go about dealing with those. In terms of freshwater, the regional policy statement sets out the visions for freshwater in the different areas of Otago, and the Land and Water Regional Plan will need to give effect to the regional policy statement. The draft plan has been developed in partnership with mana whenua, so that ensures a shared focus on freshwater management. And the plan will set new rules about how we as a community achieve the freshwater visions to protect Otago's waterways for future generations. Underpinning the plan is the concept of Te Mana o Te Wai, and that's the fundamental concept that underpins freshwater in New Zealand, freshwater management in New Zealand, as set out in the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. It's a water-centric approach to managing freshwater and sets out a hierarchy of obligations with the primary focus on protecting the health and well-being of the water body and the ecosystems that rely on it. So just coming to the purpose of the engagement really is just that we do need your input. So the community input we've had to date has been instrumental in shaping the draft Land and Water Regional Plan. So in previous consultation on the values, environmental outcomes and activities, which took place in 2021 and 2022, we got really great feedback on what's important to Otago. So we've incorporated these values into the draft plan. And now we're asking the community what you think about how we're proposing to protect those values. There is a lot of information on the website, and we have tried to break it up as much as possible so you can focus on the things that are of interest to you. We're running drop-in sessions throughout Otago where we've got people available to talk through feedback and answer people's questions. Those drop-in sessions do cover the region-wide topics, but are also focused on the area-specific provisions for those places. Today's session is a little bit different in that it's more of a briefing where we're going to be giving you a high-level overview of all the topics with time for questions and feedback afterwards, rather than kind of more like the drop-in and chat about what you're interested in session. But the key point for both of these is that we really want you to provide your feedback and preferably through the online feedback form so that we can know what you think. The form's very flexible, so you can complete as much or as little of it as you want. There's no kind of mandatory requirements to go through like screeds and screeds of fields. Just before I hand over to Tom to go through the content, I did think it would be useful to briefly cover what's included in a regional plan, just to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're even talking about here today. So a regional plan contains objectives, policies and rules. So an objective is a broad statement about what the plan aims to achieve. It outlines the desired outcomes for a particular aspect of resource management within the region. Typically, they're high level and provide a sense of direction for the plan. A policy provides a bit more specificity about guidelines and principles that support the objectives of the regional plan. They provide the framework for decision making and help in achieving the desired outcomes. But probably of most relevance is that the policies help guide resource consent applications within the region. And then finally, rules are the most detailed and specific part of a regional plan. So they outline, the standards, requirements, restrictions that must be followed when using or developing land and natural resources within a region. So they're enforceable and are used to regulate and control various activities to make sure that we achieve the objectives of the plan. There are 6 different activity statuses under the Resource Management Act. So they range from the most permitted activity through to the most restrictive, which is prohibited. In the draft plan, we've primarily used permitted, controlled and discretionary activity statuses, but would like feedback on whether those are the most appropriate statuses for various activities. Okay, just in terms of where we are at, so the RMA does set out the process that we must go through to make a regional plan, and those key steps are set out in this diagram here. Probably the key points to note is that we'll be notifying the plan by the 30th of June 2024, and that is when it will become what's known as a proposed plan and is the first step of kind of the formal Resource Management Act process. So that's when parties can make submissions and present to a hearings panel on the things that they support and oppose within the proposed plan. And then the plan itself will be going through a freshwater planning process, which requires that decisions, that these ORC decisions are made 2 years after the date of notification. Okay. Is there some questions, Matt, that I should answer before we move into the content that Tom takes us through?
There was one question about whether the slides will be made available.
Okay, yep, yes, they will. Otherwise, I'll hand over to Tom. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, this is the second time. Kia ora koutou. My name is Tom de Palsmaker. I've seen that a few people have joined since we started, so I thought it would be good to introduce myself. I'm the team leader in Fleur's policy team. Just want to grab the opportunity as well, before I dive into the nitty-gritty, to thank everyone, because this has been quite a journey. And a lot of people that are actually joining this online meeting have previously provided input and helped us actually in pulling this plan together. So a big thank you. What I'll do for the next wee while is to kind of take you through the different topics that the new land and water plan, regional plan, will cover. So if we can move on to the next slide. So basically, the plan will cover various topics. And for the vast majority of those topics, we actually have separate chapters in the plan. So there will be a chapter on the strategic directions, and that's basically an overarching chapter, and it will include some objectives and policies that apply across all the different activities. So they're kind of like an umbrella that we need to consider at all time. We also have a chapter on primary production, and that will deal with the management of discharges associated with farming and forestry, but also we'll have some land use rules to manage those activities, which is a bit of a change from our current plan. Then we'll have a chapter around the topic of managing water quantity and allocation. We'll have a chapter on activities in the beds of lakes and rivers, and that's basically a chapter that will deal with things such as building of bridges, installation of culverts, but also disturbances of riverbeds, gravel extraction, planting or removal of plants on riverbeds. There will be a chapter around the topic of damming and diversion. We'll have a chapter on earthworks and drilling as well, and that will include a number of other activities such as site investigations for contaminated land and maintenance of bores. Then we also have a chapter on other discharges, and that is kind of oddly named, but it basically captures a range of very diverse discharges, discharges of herbicides and pesticides, passive discharges from contaminated land, management of discharges from hazardous substances. We'll have chapters on stormwater management as well as wastewater management. Next slide, please. And also a chapter that deals with management of solid waste. And what I mean with it is landfills, clean fills, composting, green waste as well, green waste management. And then finally, we'll have a chapter on the management of wetlands. Now, the plan will deal with a number of other topics as well, such as threatened species and outstanding water bodies. Those topics won't have their own chapter, but those topics will be dealt with throughout all the other chapters. So, for example, we're going to try to manage threatened species or outstanding water bodies by putting certain conditions on the rules that deal with discharges or that deal with water takes, etc. And then finally, there are a number of topics as well, such as values, the environmental outcomes, the different target attribute states, and where they're going to be monitored. And they will sit not in topic chapters, but FMU chapters. And FMU, the term FMU, is actually an abbreviation for the term Freshwater Management Unit, and that is something new. The old plan, we had a number of specific rules that apply to very discrete areas or specific areas, but by and large, most of the rules applied across the region. Under new national direction, we're actually required to be a little bit more focused, a little bit more targeted, and try to deal with the issues that are specific to certain areas. So new national direction, the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, has required us to set freshwater management units in Otago. And so we split up the region into 5 freshwater management units. Some of those are entire catchments, like the Tari and the Clutha Mata'ao FMU. In other cases, we thought it would be sensible to group smaller catchments that are kind of similar in their land use or their climatic conditions, or that might contain similar communities. So we've got an FMU for the Catlins area, which is basically 4 catchments. We've got an FMU for North Otago as well, and then an FMU that comprises all the kind of coastal communities in the Dunedin, Milton kind of area. Now, one of them, the Clutha Mata'ao, is so large that we've actually split it up into sub-FMUs, which we call rohe. And so you can see them on the slide. We've got one for the Upper Lakes, one for the Dunstan area. The Manaharakia rohe is a sub-FMU as well, Roxburgh, and then the Lower Clutha. So for each of those FMUs and rohe, we'll have a chapter that will sit in the plan. Right. Thank you. I mentioned at the start that right at the front of the plan, we'll have a chapter that sets out the strategic direction. And basically what it will contain is a number of policies and objectives that seek to make sure that in every decision that we make, that we take into account some overarching principles. The first one is to give effect to mana o te wai, and Fleur kind of explained that principle already. But essentially what it means is that for every decision, we've got to give effect to te mana o te wai. And that means that we've got to implement a hierarchy of obligations. The NPSFM has basically required us to think about developing a plan that has a hierarchy, or that sets out 3 priorities, basically. The first priority is to give or to make sure that we look after the health of freshwater and freshwater ecosystems. It's only when we achieve that that we can start thinking about a second priority, which is to provide for people's health needs, such as drinking water. And then it's only after we achieve that second priority that we can start thinking about providing for all other uses associated with freshwater that can be economic or commercial uses or other values associated with it. So that's one aspect of those strategic directions. The second one is that we need to make sure that we manage water in an integrated way. And that basically means that when we think about activities in a certain area, we also have to look at what it means for water bodies, not in the immediate vicinity, but further downstream as well. Integrated management also means that we look at the interactions, not just between water bodies, but also between land and water, and between water quality and water quantity. Also, what we want to do under this chapter is making sure that we look ahead and that we look, that we respond to the challenges that climate change is bringing us. It also tries to give us some direction in how we make decisions in the presence of uncertainties or in the absence of robust information. And previously, that has often led to decisions that resulted in, well, let's give it a try, you know, like, let's see what happens. And, you know, if a certain activity that is permitted has too much effect, we'll step in. The NPSFM has required us to take a different tact and be more precautionary. And what it means is, if we're not quite sure whether an activity will have an acceptable effect, we actually need to kind of be precautionary and be cautious and put a safety net around it. And then finally, it also requires us to recognize the need for transitions. Some of the changes that will occur under this new plan will be quite significant. It will be quite a step up from our current plan. And that might mean that in certain circumstances, we will need it to allow for a transition, to let people and communities, give them a chance to adapt, basically. That will be done through the plan, but it can also be done through consenting as well. So that's kind of an overview of the strategic direction. Now I'm going to take you through some of the more specific topics and chapters. And the first one is farming. At the moment, the current plan already deals with a lot of activities associated with farming, but it's quite a permissive framework. It's also, to a degree, effects-based, which means that we basically say we'll allow most of the activities to occur on land. We just want to deal with the effects. Now, that's a little bit reactive because often an activity is established and it's only then that you see the effects occurring. It's really hard to kind of scale back on an activity when it's established. So that's kind of the downsides of having an effects-based framework. We also have quite a number of rules in the current plan to deal with discharges, but very limited land use rules. Some of the rules are a little bit outdated as well. They don't reflect current best practice. And the policy guidance that sits around those rules is not very strong as well. It often talks about promoting and encouraging, but that's really hard to enforce. So what we've done is we've updated certain aspects of that framework.
It appears we may just have lost Tom. We'll just see what's happened to him. So everyone just sit tight for a moment.
Has Tom disappeared? Okay.
Yes, so Amber's just headed off to his meeting room to A, make sure he's still there and upright, and B, see if we can get him reconnected. Right, so Tom's just rejoining the meeting, but he will be a minute or two while his computer restarts. So probably a good opportunity if anyone has any questions, any short questions about the sections that have come so far that we could perhaps answer.
Welcome to Gretchen, at least. If you wanted to say anything, Gretchen, go for it.
I'm just saying hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. It's fantastic to have everyone here, and yeah, we're just here to encourage some conversation. So yeah, do sing out if you have any questions or anything that you would like to give us feedback on.
Right, I see we've got a question in the chat. So what technical information has been relied upon in setting the nitrogen limits that are proposed?
Just make sure.
Tom Dyer, do you want to have a crack at answering that?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I wonder if it might be. Here's Tom. I wonder if we want to save it now and keep Tom moving, or get into that.
We can save it if you like.
Yeah, let's do that. I think it might fit better at the end of the section.
Yep.
Sorry. Back online. Shall I continue? Or...
All right, back to you, Tom.
Thank you. Apologies for that technical hiccup. Right, where are we? So I'll just pick up where I left it. So basically, a number of rules that are currently in the plan actually do the job, and they reflect current best practice. So we want to keep those rules. In a number of other circumstances, we have a good basis, but the rules need a little bit of updating. For example, the fertilizer discharge one is an example of that. But then there's also a few gaps in the current plan, management gaps, and where we need to introduce new rules to manage the risks associated with them. Those are feedlots, pasture-based wintering, silage storage, farm landfills as well. And we also want to have some rules around the management of irrigation expansion and the conversion of land use to more intensive uses as well. And also strengthen the policy guidance, which will help us to actually achieve better outcomes through the consenting process and more consistent outcomes as well. So those will be changes to the region-wide rule and policy framework, but we also will have some specific rules that only apply to certain areas in Otago, not to all areas. And those will sit under those relevant FMU or ROHE chapters. So for some areas, we'll require consent for dairy farming and dairy support, and that will be new and existing operations. And in other areas, we might set increased setbacks for high-risk activities, such as intensive winter grazing. Finally, the plan will also try to anticipate the arrival of freshwater farm plants. That is a new thing. It's not currently covered by the plan. And what that means is we're actually trying to put some direction in the plan that ensures that those freshwater farm plans will achieve the outcomes that the plan is trying to achieve as well, so that the rules and the farm plans kind of work together towards the same outcome. Something that we're actively thinking about as well is that certain activities that will need a consent under the new plan, is there an option for having an alternative pathway, and so have them managed by certified freshwater farm plans? The current proposal is to limit that pathway to a number of what we consider to be lower risk activities. Sacrifice paddocks, I believe, is one, management of that, intensive winter grazing as well. But like I said, it's something that we're actively thinking about, and we are also seeking some input from you as to whether there's anything else that could be managed. And then finally, one of the things that we're actually struggling with is information. Information is something that we benefit from when we set rules. It allows us to be quite targeted. And we're kind of thinking ahead to the, have an eye on the future, any plan changes that might be needed, or any reviews of this plan. So we thought it would be useful to set in the plan some direction around the information that we like to be included in the freshwater farm plans and provided to ORC, so it can actually help us to refine the rules and refine the framework later on. Next slide, please. Forestry. The current plan does not actively deal with forestry. We don't have rules that manage plantation forestry or carbon forestry. We do have some rules that manage some of the effects from forestry indirectly. So those are rules that apply to a wide range of activities, including forestry, but also farming. And some of those go actually beyond the national environmental standards for plantation forestry. So that those rules that provide a little bit of more stringency, we want to retain them, but also we'll have some specific land use rules as well for managing permanent and plantation forestry. One of those is a rule that will require consent for plantation forestry that is more than 10 hectares. And we'll also have the rules written in a sense that they allow us to consider impacts of plantation forestry on not just water quality, but also water quantity, water yield, and any freshwater ecosystems that may be present near forested areas. So that way we're trying to manage specifically exotic forestry. When it comes to indigenous plantings, we want to be first and foremost enabling. So have an enabling pathway for that type of forestry. Moving on to next slide.
Just a question whether we want to deal with some of the questions in the chat on the farming and forestry before we move on. Or if you want to do it all at the end, I wasn't sure.
Happy to deal with the questions now. Yeah. And
Okay.
some of the questions I might actually refer to Felicity or Amber or Delina, or
Tom,
kind of the experts, or Tom. Yeah.
Okay, do we want to circle back to the question we had before about what technical information is being relied upon to set the nitrogen limits that are proposed?
Is that a question for Delina or Tom?
I think
Yeah,
Tom was going to have a crack at that one.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to just get a quick policy overview on which technical bits have actually been relied upon, and then I can follow up with what those documents are or studies were and how they fit. So whether that's Tom or Delana.
Yep, I can jump in here and just say that we have a report. We've been looking at the state of the environment and the trends, the baseline states, and looking at particularly the state of periphyton and the macroinvertebrates and invertebrates. And these indicate that reductions in nitrogen and phosphorus in particular are required. That report is not final yet, it's still in draft form, and we're just waiting for that to be made final before we can make it public.
Yeah, so there's two things to follow up on there. One report, which is our water quality state and trends report, was published in July this year and is available on our website. That gives you an insight into where things are at within each FMU or rohe across the region with regards to certain nutrients, and obviously in this case, N being a key one. We've also undertaken some modelling, looking specifically at estimated N inputs in certain parts of the region, N concentrations within stream, and how nitrogen and phosphorus are affecting periphyton outcomes in stream. So what we see in terms of algal growth. And that, as Delina mentioned before, that report is still in draft and nearly finalised. We rely on a couple of national models or national interfaces to be able to deal with that. And there's been those have been modified or updated a couple of times in the last little while. And we've tried to make sure that we're keeping up with the most current data available. But I'd expect we'll have that one out within the next few weeks.
Great. Next question is maybe covered in the presentation, but why are the Tairi FMU restrictions on stocking rate, setbacks, and nitrogen use stricter than the national regulations? And what is the rationale and science behind that?
So that again is.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, happy to jump in here.
Yeah.
That again is based on looking at what the state of the environment is telling us about the conditions of the water quality in each FMU, looking at what needs to be which of the attributes of the contaminants of concern, nitrogen or phosphorus or E. coli, need to be reduced, and looking at what are some of the tools that we have to make those reductions.
Yeah, for each of the FMU specific provisions, we kind of developed a bit of a process really, where we looked at what is the land use, what is the state of the environment, and what are the key contaminants that cause issues. And also we looked at what is the current gap between, where we're currently in terms of water quality and how much of a jump do we need to make to achieve the outcomes. And based on that, we developed some targeted rules for specific activities in specific FMUs, such as the Tairi.
Next question we've got is how are or will the groundwater aquifer allocations be based? How do they relate to the current allocations?
I will probably cover that off in one of the next slides, really. Yep.
Excellent. Bit of a complex question, but it appears that there may be a need for multiple consents. How will this process be managed? And do you have any idea on how much the consents will cost and for what period of time they will be granted for?
A lot of questions. Some of them will be covered off in the next slides around duration of consents. That is something I'm intending to talk about. That has been an issue in the past as well, the fact that for certain activities, you need a range of consents. And that is something we actively thought about as well going forward. For a number of topics, like, for example, damming, and we actually try to kind of write the rules so they capture all the associated activities as well, so that to reduce the number of consents. But yeah, if you have a feeling, or if people have a feeling that for other topics we could do a little bit more extra around that, we are happy to take feedback. Again, it's something we're thinking of. It's trying to increase, yeah, basically those consent processes, make them more efficient and more streamlined by bundling different requirements.
Excellent. And the next one is there any clear benefit or evidence for making farmers remove existing fences on waterways to shift them to a different position?
I'll start, like, in a number of cases that might be required, but I think where we actually set rules that go beyond what is currently required under national regulations, we recognize that that's an issue, and there will be a transition period as well, I believe, Delina.
That's correct. We would anticipate a transition period which would allow a general replacement time anyway. So, 10 or 15 years.
But we are very much looking for feedback on what an appropriate transition time would be. So please do tell us.
Next question, what technical reports are being made available and when, e.g. the setting of baseline attribute states? The information on the website has changed since it was first uploaded and lacks any detail. Thanks.
Do you want to have a crack at those? I know that some of the baseline state report is actually, we've got it's in draft form, but it's pretty near completion.
Sorry, I've just had a headphone issue and have just managed to get back an earshot of the meeting. I assume you just asked the question that's in the chat around the baseline state work. Yep. So our baseline state report has been in development for some time and is very, very nearly there. We're just at a final draft stage now, and will be released shortly. But we do regret having that out in advance of consultation. It's been a challenging one to put together, but it's not far away.
Right, and then maybe one more before we sort of get back into the presentation itself. Is there anything in the plan concerning weeds and pests such as geese and willow?
Felicity, can you? Or we because we also have a pest management plan as well.
Yes, so one of the things we have done in the draft plan is to include greater restrictions on spread of pests. So it's a bit inconsistently managed in the current water plan. So the new draft plan definitely has a focus on preventing the spread of those pests. And willows are a difficult one because the way they've been used in flood protection for flood protection purposes. There's a difficult line between what a regional plan can contain and what's the council's jurisdiction under their pest management function. So we're doing our best to ensure that those two documents are working together, but some things like the control of geese is probably a pest management issue rather than a regional plan issue.
Thanks. All right, Tom, I'll throw it back to you to carry on with the presentation. We'll answer some more questions a bit later on.
Yep. Water quantity, probably something some of you will be interested in. At the moment, the plan does have minimum flows and minimum levels for some aquifers or lakes, but they're fairly small in numbers. And what I mean with that is, for example, we've got about 300 catchments, but we only have minimum flows for 14 or 15 of them. In the plan itself, we only have lake levels for 1 or 2 lakes, although some lakes are managed, their levels are managed through consents. And again, for aquifers, I believe there's 1 or 2 aquifers that have a restriction level. Under national legislation, we've got to set minimum flows or environmental flows or levels for all rivers, aquifers, and lakes. Now, we're not going to set levels for all lakes because the definition of a lake is very broad. It means any body of water that is surrounded by land, and there's a risk there that you would capture unintentionally irrigation reservoirs that are off-stream. So we try to avoid that. But other than that, we're going to set minimum flows and levels for all rivers. Aquifers, not at this stage, because it's a little bit harder. We don't have a monitoring network or a model that allows us to do that, but it's something that might be done further down the track through a plan change. But definitely also setting levels for natural lakes, controlled lakes like Lake Hawea, or in-stream artificial lakes. Take limits as well. We do have take limits for all rivers and all aquifers, although there's an exception. Actually, we don't have a take limit for the main stem of the Clutha Mata'ao and the Kawara River. But other than that, we've got a default for the majority of rivers and aquifers, and some bespoke limits as well. The trouble with the default is that it's actually a product of a compromise through environment court mediation, and it doesn't really give effect to Te Mana o Te Wai. In some cases it might, but in many cases there's no evidence that it supports ecosystem health. So for the default limits going forward, we're actually trying to make sure that those are based on good evidence. And so they'll be more stringent. At the moment, the take limits for rivers are 50% of mean annual low flow. Going forward, the take limits will be more conservative, depending on the size of the river. So it will be 20% that we're allocate, or 30% for bigger rivers. In general, we have no take limits for lakes. Again, that is something that we'll do going forward. Over allocation, the current plan does have a framework for managing over allocation, and some aspects of it have worked quite well in the past. We've got a range of policies that try to phase out over allocation. One of them is actually a policy that tries to take back unused water. Like in some cases, consents allow for more water to be taken than people actually take. So we end up with what we call paper water. And the current policies that seek to remove that paper water have worked quite well. Others are more based on voluntary action, and so they might fall short of actually phasing out over allocation, which is something that we have to do under the NPSFM. So going forward, our policies will be strengthened to make sure that we're actually achieving the phasing out of those issues within certain specified timeframes. We try to be mindful that a one-fits-all approach in that regard doesn't really work, and that certain over-allocated catchments might have specific issues. So we try to build in a framework that allows flexibility and that gives people the time as well to come up with their own catchment specific solutions. However, if catchments that are deemed to be over allocated can't come up with those solutions, or if those solutions actually don't achieve the outcomes, we need to have a backstop. So in that case, we need to kind of unfortunately look at removing or clawing back on some of the water use as well. Maybe move on to the next slide. Efficiency. We have to make sure that water is used efficient. The plan again has some policies that encourage people to be efficient in how they use water, but it's not very clear. And there's also no clear guidance as to what is efficient. It doesn't set clear thresholds. You know, you might say, we want people to be efficient in the way they use water for stock, but what is reasonable use? What is efficient use? So going forward, we'll have some clear guidelines, some clear direction as to what efficient use is, not just for irrigation, but also for domestic use, for stock water requirements as well. One thing that we want to retain from the current plan is a policy framework that encourages people, or that allows people to shift from an over-allocated water body to an alternative source, if that is practical, where there is available allocation. The current framework for managing water takes gives us limited ability to consider the effects of the take or the use on water quality. And again, that comes back to that integrated management. So going forward in the new plan, there will be some ability under the rules to consider water quality effects, and there will be some policy guidance to allow us to make right decisions in that regard as well. One of the things we talked about a few minutes ago was duration of consents. The current plan doesn't give a lot of guidance, but it created an expectation that people could have a 35-year consent. That is that for a long time, actually, that has been a little bit out of step with national practice. And now with new legislation coming in as well, even more so. So the new plan will actually be setting consent durations that are in line with new anticipated legislation, and consent durations will be much shorter. It's a big change for Otago, but it is actually in line with what is happening or what will be happening elsewhere as well. So a consent typically would have a 10-year duration maximum. In catchments where we've got over allocation or where we have serious water quality issues, that might be shorter. In other circumstances, when you're dealing with you know, nationally significant infrastructure, might be a little bit longer, but a long-term consent going forward would be, you know, more within that 10-year kind of mark. Finally, in the water quantity space, a few words around the permitted activity framework. Some of our permitted activity takes have been quite generous, and in areas where we have issues around water availability, that is a bit of a problem. So what we've tried to do is, downsize some of those permitted takes. There will still be permitted takes, but they will again be scaled to the size of the water body, which I think makes sense. And they'll also be restricted to a number of uses only, so primarily for domestic use and stock water and temporary takes as well. One of the things that we have struggled with in the past is that people stack, and what I mean with stack is they take water under one rule and at the same time take water under another rule, and in some cases take water under a consent and in addition to that, water under a permitted activity rule. That's what we call stacking. Again, it can lead in some cases to perverse or undesirable outcomes. So we'll have some direction around avoiding that, those issues. Okay, next slide. The damming and diversion rules. Like I said before, especially in this area, damming activities in the past have triggered a number of different rules: damming of water, disturbances of riverbed, establishment of structures on the riverbed. So a whole range of rules, and we try to avoid that by just having one catch-all rule. But also the current provisions are a little bit out of date as well. And they actually are inconsistent with national direction. Going forward, the framework will enable off-stream dams, but really we want to move away from a framework that allows for dams to be established in the stream itself, because that often mucks up hydrology further downstream. Also, we want to make sure that where they do occur, that those in-stream dams will contribute to achieving those environmental flows or minimum flows further downstream, or at least don't impede them being achieved as well. Diversion is, again, a set of rules that are currently a little bit unclear, and we try to refine them to be a little bit more clear. So yeah, make a clear distinction between takes that are diversions and takes that are actually takes. Right, happy to move on, or happy to kind of answer questions as well. I see that a few questions are coming in. I'm not sure. Matt, what do you think?
I think we can continue. We're sort of getting the questions answered on the fly by our subject matter experts. So I think most of those are being answered. Any that can't be answered, we'll probably get to at the end when we do our Q&A session.
Yeah, sounds great. Now, on to stormwater. Stormwater at the moment, we've got a very permissive framework. Discharges from stormwater, whether it's reticulated or non-reticulated, currently don't require a consent. Stormwater, in many cases, isn't always pure rainwater. You know, on its way through streams or creeks or lakes, they take up contaminants. So it's something that we want to manage, especially discharges from reticulated networks. They need to be managed, and the best way to do that is through a consenting regime. And the reason behind that is because stormwater networks are quite complex, and in some cases a consent is actually a better way than a one-fits-all rule. Now we recognize that there's quite a distance, that there's quite a big change. So we come up with a framework that allows for 2 stages. Under the first stage, network operators will be given a short-term consent of 5 years that basically provides for a transition period in which they can map their network and also kind of start monitoring the effects of that. So they can prepare for a second consent that actually adequately deals with the effects of those discharges. One of the conditions that will be required under that consent is a stormwater management plan. And the consent itself will try to deal with not just the water quality aspect, but also the volume of the discharges, making sure that we're not overloading our river or stream network during those high rainfall events. Non-reticulated stormwater, if it's in general, we allow those to be to continue to be permitted, subject to conditions. But for some high-risk non-reticulated discharges of stormwater, for example, when it's from a commercial or an industrial site, we believe it's better to manage it through a consent. And in those cases, again, we try to put the same kind of safety net around it as we do with the reticulated discharges. So compliance with a management plan and making sure that we're managing the volume as well as the contaminants. On to wastewater. Thank you. At the moment, what we see is that some of the reticulated wastewater discharges are still occurring to water. And some of you will be aware of that. We also see frequent sewage overflows. Those are two particular things that we want to address. We want to phase out those direct discharges to water. In general, discharges to land pose less of a risk. And we want to put a time frame onto that as well. Again, that is something we're seeking feedback on, and we're also keeping an eye on what's happening with our regional policy statement, which has some higher overarching direction in that regard on that matter. But we also will be requiring at a consenting stage to make sure that when we reconsent existing networks, that they will be upgraded progressively to avoid the risk of sewage overflows as well. Septic tanks as well is an issue that has come up quite a few times in the past, particularly because older systems are very poorly managed under the plan. They're mostly permitted. Going forward, we still want to permit old and new systems, but we'll put some more stringent or more effective conditions on them. And where we feel that they're in kind of sensitive areas, high risk areas, they will need a consent as well. We also have some rules for managing discharges from composting toilets, because we see them occurring more and more frequently, whereas the old plan didn't have them. And then finally, in terms of managing discharges from trade and industrial waste, in the past, we actually always required consent, and now we're trying to be a little bit more targeted, allowing for some smaller discharges to be permitted, but subject to conditions. And for larger, we would still require a consent. Again, we try to encourage or make sure that any new discharges of trade and industrial wastewater, that they go to land rather than to water. Next slide. Apart from discharges from stormwater and wastewater, there's a whole range of other discharges that we need to be mindful of. For example, discharges of solid waste. And what I mean with that is discharges that come from landfills, clean fills, green waste, or composting heaps. We also need to manage hazardous substances. There's a number of issues that we currently have. Some of those activities are managed under two different plans that we have. We have a water plan and we have a waste plan. It's not very effective. It's and definitely not cost effective. It also has created over time, as those plans were changed, discrepancies as well as to how they're managed under the different plans. So basically going forward, we want to manage them under one plan. So we'll bring in those provisions from the waste plan or the updated provisions into the new land and water plan, which will make it more efficient. The current policy framework lacks guidance, and in general, what we try to do is make sure that any rules or any policies that manage those types of discharges actually require compliance with national guidelines as well, or national legislation, or that they reflect current good management practices. Also trying to kind of better manage the different responsibilities under different acts. So for example, the RMA deals with certain aspects of hazardous substances, as well as the the HASNO Act. And so manage that a little bit better, avoid overlap. And just make sure that the rules actually avoid contamination of freshwater bodies or soil altogether from those kind of high risk activities. Shall we move on to the next one? Wetlands. We currently manage wetlands under the plan, but we've basically focused only on what we called regionally significant wetlands. The plan actually doesn't have any meaningful protection or provide any meaningful protection for other wetlands. And the level of protection provided by the current plan to those regionally significant wetlands is actually below what is nationally required. Oops, sorry, just losing. So going forward, we try to make sure that the wetland provisions are more in line with national legislation. And in some cases, that means going a little bit beyond it. For example, the national regulations require the exclusion of cattle, pigs, and deer. We think it's sensible to exclude other heavy livestock, such as horses as well, from wetlands that are currently protected by national legislation. The only trouble with reliance on national regulations is that they only look at a subset of wetlands. So the way they've defined natural inland wetlands means that some types of wetlands actually aren't protected. And we think it's important to provide a degree of protection for those wetlands as well. So we'll have some restrictions on high-risk activities that can cause wetland loss for wetlands that aren't necessarily meeting the definition of a natural inland wetland. Finally, outstanding water bodies, and that is something new. We currently don't manage outstanding water bodies. It's basically water bodies with high ecological, high natural character or landscape values. And so what we've done is we've mapped them, and we'll also describe their values in the plan. We'll have some strong policy direction that seeks to avoid loss of those really outstanding or significant values of outstanding water bodies, where an activity will have a minor effect or an effect that is only temporary in nature. We're trying to be a little bit more enabling, and we try to be especially enabling when it comes to activities that actually seek to enhance and restore the values of those outstanding water bodies. If you're interested in what those outstanding water bodies are and what the values are, I'd encourage you to go to the website. And specifically on the website, you'll find overviews, like summaries for each of the FMUs, and there you can find those outstanding water bodies and their values. Again, we're trying to manage them, as I said before, within the different chapters of the plan. So by setting conditions on rules that relate to management of water quantity, so in the water quantity chapter, or through conditions on rules in the damming chapter, etc. Earthworks and bore management. In recent years, we did an update to our current water plan to tackle some of the issues that we had around sediment discharges to rivers, especially around high growth areas, areas that are rapidly urbanized. And some examples of that are Queenstown, Wanaka. What we saw there is a lot of residential development causing issues with sediment going into the waterways. And we try to tackle that through a plan change to our current plan. And we actually got some rules and policies around that in the current plan. They seem to be working quite well, but that was always intended to be an initial step, almost like, yeah, something that we need to build on going forward. So we've done that now. We've retained our earthworks rule, but instead of only limiting it to residential activities or residential earthworks, we kind of increased its scope to capture all types of earthworks. But we try to be more nuanced. For example, the current rule sets a limit on volume. In the new plan, we've increased that limit. We allow for some larger scale earthworks to occur, provided certain conditions around setbacks and the slope are met. So certain activities that would require a consent under the current plan might be permitted going forward. Bores as well, we currently manage them as a controlled activity. So that means that we always grant the consent, but we just want to make sure that when you install a bore, that it's safe. What we've done there is basically retain that activity status. So keep the rule, but make sure that it's in accordance with national guidelines, and also make sure that the maintenance of those bores is better managed as well. And then finally, I think we're down to the last slide now. Activities on the beds of lakes and rivers. Like I said before, that captures a wide range of activities. But in general, our current rules are a little bit out of date. They're too permissive. We're still trying to be permissive when and allow for a permitted activity where we're dealing with small scale works or small scale structures in the beds of lakes and rivers. But we've made some changes as well. Two of the key changes is reducing the volume of permitted gravel extractions. At the moment, it's 20 or 25 cubic meters, and we're bringing that down. The reason for that is that the current volume limit is too big for certain rivers. And then suction dredge mining as well, no longer permitted activity, almost for the same reason, really. In some areas, it might be okay, but actually, by and large, we think it's better to have it a consented activity because it's not appropriate for especially some of those higher value freshwater bodies. Again, in this chapter, we try to kind of bundle our current rules and transform them into a new rule that captures different aspects of different activities. And then finally, in that chapter as well, we actually want to enable certain activities, especially where they're kind of having a good environmental outcome as well. So that's an overview of the key aspects, I believe, of our region-wide provisions. Like I said before, we have some specific rules and policies that apply to certain areas. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to kind of go into detail into those rules and policies, and it's our intent to kind of, deal with those during the FMU community drop-in sessions. But happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Tom. That was really great. Does anyone want to raise a question, like raise their hand and ask a question, or are we happy to keep going through the chat? There's quite a bit of activity there if people are reading through that.
does that mean we've done a good enough job of answering all the questions in the chat, or does anyone need a more fuller sort of verbal answer that maybe they didn't quite get everything they needed from the chat? I see Rob's got a hand up there.
Yeah, just with obviously dairies being a controlled activity there, for people who can't comply with those controlled activity settings and are gonna need a discretionary consent, is there any sort of, like, what are those next level of controls going to look like for people that are, you know, going for those consents? Like, if people have stocking rates of, you know, upwards of 3.5 sort of dairy cows per hectare and have been applying closer to the 190, which is allowed under the NES, is that going to be allowed long term, or what do you think that framework's going to look like going into that consenting process?
So it's probably a question for Delina, but maybe I'll have a crack at starting off and then she can fill in the gaps, if that's all right. So the question was around, it was quite hard to hear you, Rob, so we just had a bit of trouble kind of, so let me know if I get it wrong. But the question is basically, if people can't meet the controlled activity conditions for a dairy consent, what kind of, well, I guess what's the regime going to be like getting a discretionary activity consent? I guess maybe the question kind of is, how difficult is that going to be? Does that kind of cover it, Rob?
Yeah, so sorry, just more around, yeah, just how difficult are those, like, or restrictive are those, like, consent sort of controls going to be when you apply for those discretionary consents? Because obviously there's the controlled activity settings there around the 100 kilos of N per hectare and the stocking rate of 2.5, but obviously most probably Otago dairy farms at the moment are above those. So it's just like, how is that going to look long term, and are there going to be reduction targets as part of those consent requirements, or how do you envision that looking?
Right, thank you, Rob. That's made it much clearer. Yeah. So the reasoning behind the controlled activity was so that some of the lower intensity dairy farming activities, for example, you know, like the class 1 or class 2 dairy farms, should be able to get through the controlled consent pathway. If we've set that kind of threshold a bit low, then we're keen to get that feedback. But basically, really, what we're looking for is for activity to manage the nutrient discharge and get some of those contaminant losses reduced. So that would be the key thing that we would be looking at in those consents.
Yeah, Tom here. It's probably hard to kind of, we almost need to look at it on a case-by-case basis. It kind of depends as well, you know, like how hard is it going to get a consent under an RDA or a discretionary activity? It kind of depends as well as the gap, you know, how big is the gap between where the receiving water body is now and where it needs to be.
Yep. So you sort of see that you're sort of thinking maybe that'll be through the farm environment plans as well, and a bit of sort of auditing and just more catchment related going forwards. Is that what you're sort of saying?
Definitely, the farm environment plans will have an effect on what we're looking at. Yep.
Sweet. Thank you for that.
Evelyn, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, kia ora, thank you. My question is perhaps a little bit more of an umbrella question, in the sense that in the new plan, consenting and or freshwater farm plans, how much information, science and considerations on the part of the council will actually be given to dry land areas as opposed to the Tari or wherever, non-dry land areas, to make it nice and simple. That is the question, really. Is the dry land areas where, for example, in our area, there are already 23 dairy farms. One could consider on present science that it was an ill-advised consent in the first place. In fact, I don't believe it was actually a consented activity. People could just change their activities from the appropriate dryland farming to dairy farms. How much consideration from now on is going to be given to the dry land farming, which of itself is such a specialised area? Thank you.
Tom, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll have a go. If I'm not, I hope I interpret the question in the right way. I think, Evelyn, what you're trying to say is like the dryland areas have been converted to, irrigated areas or more intensively used areas, and will we be managing that conversion? And I think the simple answer to that is yes, we will. And not just through freshwater farm plans, primarily actually through the land and water plan.
Thank you.
That's correct, Tom. I think the simple answer is that conversions to dairy and any extension to dairy will require consent through the land and water plan.
Just working through some of the questions that haven't been answered in the chat. One from Rob is, how do you anticipate facilitating clawback of water takes from water users? Will this be done based on historic use or a pro rate across all users on a specific water body to get the achieved environmental result? Will this be able to be done only at consent renewals, or will this be able to be done during the duration of the consent?
I'm just hearing from another of our policy analysts to answer that for Rob, Matt. So if you want to move on to another question, unless Tom wants to answer.
I'll have a crack at that. Like I said before, we're trying to get communities to kind of come up with their own solutions. In many cases, where you have an over-allocation issue, there's a good chance that it is basically over-allocation on paper. So that when we look at actually the actual water use, it is still below the take limit or the allocation limit. So basically surrendering or stripping away that paper water will actually be effective in quite a large number of instances. In other cases where that's not enough, we'll allow people to, like I said, come up with their own solutions, and we'll provide some time for that. If that doesn't work, we need to claw back proportionally. We will consider with those clawbacks the kind of Tamana to Y framework. And so what I mean with that is that those second priority uses will the majority of the brunt will be will have to be borne by third priority uses, so uses that are lower on the priority, like economics use. So we'll claw back on those ones first before we actually start taking away drinking water. The clawbacks themselves, current legislation, so the RMA actually doesn't allow us to claw back. It does allow us to set minimum flows, but it doesn't allow us to strip away water allocation. So it will be done through the consenting, not through a consent review clause, I believe. Yeah, there's a legal aspect to that as well, but I think there's limitations as to what we can do.
Excellent. Thanks for that. That answers that question. Thank you.
Thank you.
See a hand up from David Cooper.
Kia ora. Appreciate the willingness to engage over this stuff. Maybe half a statement, half a question, but I guess the three things we're looking at here is where we're trying to get to, how we're trying to get there, and how soon we need to get there. And these are all moving pieces. We're sort of building the plane as we're flying around all three of those. Just wondering if there's an opportunity for Regional Council to circle back around prior to the plan being notified on some of these technical components, identify some stakeholders, have a fleshing out of some of the proposals we're looking at here, because it's really quite complex, and you can appreciate someone, a farmer sitting there going, well, I'm not likely to make a profit this year. Why am I going to spend hours getting involved in this? Just tap me on the shoulder when it's all done. So is there a way we could sort of circle back to farmer leaders, for example, to flesh out some of these details post this consultation process?
I'll have a go at that. Maybe Fleur can elaborate, but I think definitely from a staff perspective, we're very mindful of that. Like the easiest to communicate is a simple rule, and I realize that the rules are not simple, because simple rules are often quite blunt as well. So it's kind of a catch-22. You want to be providing or be as focused and as tailored as possible, but that is not easy to communicate. So from a staff level, we're kind of happy to engage as much as possible with community leaders or industry leaders. The only thing that stands in the way really is the fact that we're bound by a time frame. We've got an agreement with the minister that we notify the plan within a certain time, and there are certain requirements that we need to meet, requirements in terms of consulting with certain parties, including the community, and this is one of them, before we get to notification. So there's that kind of tension. I think, I'd be a bit worried to commit here to, like a widespread further engagement, but it is something that it's very good feedback. We'll take it back and have a think about how we can best do that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just adding to that is that I think we have been in touch with or we've had a few stakeholder sessions, and as a result of some of those sessions, we will be, testing various things between now and June, and including with yourself, David. And so, I mean, we certainly want to get as good a product as we can in the time available, noting that it's even by June, it's not going to be perfect, and there's going to be things that come through the Schedule 1 process, that helps us make it even better. So, I guess the key point really is that we do just really want to make sure we get as much feedback as possible about kind of the specifics about how we can make it better, it's easy for people to say, we don't like that, but we kind of need a bit more like about what, how to make it better, how to make it improved. So yeah, really keen for that feedback. Thanks.
Yeah, if I may add on to that, Fleur, like we still have a number of FMU consultations as well throughout the region in the coming weeks, and they're kind of dispersed across the region. They're not all. We've got one in the Dunedin area at Mossgiel next week. We've got a few happening in Central. During those FMU consultations as well, we're not limiting ourselves to discuss only FMU specific stuff. Often we're talking about region-wide rules as well. So if you see a chance of jumping into those drop-in sessions, that's good. And then the time frame as well. The time frame for providing feedback is until 6th of November.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was on the next slide, but it's the one after, I think.
See, we've got a hand up from Jeremy.
It's not Jeremy, actually, it's Dawn Sangster. There's a few of us in at the MIC offices. I'd like to back David up on a bit of consultation on trying to get some practical outcomes for farmers. I think one of the most concerning things for farmers will be your fencing provisions. It's really going to be heartbreaking for farmers being asked to shift existing fences, and you're really punishing those farmers who have been proactive over a long period of time and put the fencing in, and then to be asked to shift it. And I don't care if it's 10 years, it's really very unfair unless you've got a lot of scientific evidence that maybe there's a particular area, but a blanket rule like that would be very hard. Some of those 10-metre setbacks will be very difficult. And it's not only the cost of the fencing, it's actually the time and the labour involved. And as some of you know, I know some of you don't know, but farmers actually haven't got a lot of discretionary income this year. It is a really tough time for farmers. Mental health in the ag sector has never been poorer. And consultation during the spring period in the middle of the day is very unfair as well. So I would encourage you to try and engage with some of the farmers that are prepared to engage with you. You should be having evening sessions during the spring period and really try and think about the cost that you're imposing on farmers. Think about the cost and the benefit and how we can get better outcomes. I mean, I think farmers have really embraced fencing, winter grazing. They've been really engaged throughout the whole national standard process. And I think people have taken that role, and we've done a lot of fencing in the Maniatoto. We certainly haven't done 10-metre setbacks. That's never been even talked about. So I think you'll find that people are really discouraged, that you're going to have trouble engaging with them when they're showing a blanket disregard for how they feel. Thanks.
Thank you for that feedback. And yeah, like that is the kind of things that we do want to hear about. Like we don't want to propose things that aren't going to make sense, aren't going to work. And if this is one of those things, like we're more than happy to have another look at how we can do it in a different way. So thank you.
I see another hand up from the group under the name of Jeremy. Or was that the existing hand up?
No, sorry, it is Jeremy here this time. Just in terms of, and also following a little bit from David's comment, just in terms of stakeholder engagement to date, I just wonder if that's been broad enough in terms of rural leaders, because within the catchment, I suppose there's, different people with different views, and I just hope that that's been broad enough to get the overall feeling of the community rather than the views of a very narrow group of people with probably some strong agendas, because clearly, there is different views within different land uses, I think, and without seeming sensitive, the dairy industry seems to be lightning rod for a lot of this new plan. So it's more of an observation than a question, obviously. Just like I say, I think stakeholder engagement could be broader.
That's good. Good feedback. Yeah, we'll keep that in mind in a sense that you know, like maybe when we send out information to people or community groups, that we make sure that we've got it covered across all the different sectors. We've definitely tried to do that, but it's always good to kind of make sure that whether it's written or verbal communication, that we reach all those different groups.
See, we've got a hand up there from Ray.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering, we've got a farm on the Taieri that borders the state highway. It's sort of like the Venice effect, you know, when COVID happened there, their waterways got a lot clearer, didn't they? And we noticed when people weren't travelling up and down the road that it had a sort of interesting impact on the waterways and the drains. How does, I mean, there's specific groups like farmers targeted under this, but you know, the general public that are using the State Highway 1 alongside the waterways and whatnot, how does the plan sort of capture detrimental effects there?
So we do have some restrictions on the use of dust suppressants in the new land and water plan. There's been, we're carrying through the existing prohibition on using waste oil as a dust suppressant on those gravel roads. And there's some increased stringency for the types of substances that can be used as dust suppressants. So certainly the effects of those kind of discharges to water from the use of rural roads is something that this plan does manage.
No, but I'm talking about State Highway 1.
And are you talking about the discharges like from rainwater that runs off the state highway?
Well, yeah, like tyres leave certain substances on the highway, which then get washed off into drains and waterways on the adjacent farmland, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay. So, it would be Waka Kotahi who's responsible for managing that state highway network, and they may well require consent for the discharges of stormwater from those networks.
Yeah, I guess it's probably more just general pollutants, but yeah, look, let me waste any more time on this call. Thanks.
I see Councillor Noon was next.
Yeah, hey, look, thanks, Matt. You can hear me okay?
Yep, good as gold.
Yeah, because hey, look, I just want to make a couple of comments. I've just got to sneak away, but firstly, just acknowledging what Dawn mentioned about, you know, it's a busy time of the year in the rural sector, and obviously, you know, financially stretched as well. So yeah, we're aware of that situation, but yeah, we've obviously got a box on with this process. But yeah, we certainly acknowledge that. But in terms of the process we're in, these are definitely draft rules, and it's a proposed plan at this point. I just want to really reinforce that. This consultation process needs to be meaningful, and you know, we need to clearly consider all feedback in a genuine manner, and we will do that. I like the idea that David and Dawn talked about, you know, having that the community leaders as a sounding board. If we can find the time to do that, that would be really important to do. And just the last thing was the freshwater farm plans. I just think that the visibility and the importance of those alongside the land and water plan is absolutely critical, and that pathway, the freshwater farm plan pathway, is something that we would certainly be wanting to ensure it's front of mind, not only for the organisation but certainly for the farming sector and landowners. But hey, appreciate that. Thanks very much, and thank you everybody for attending. Cheers.
Thank you. And I see the next hand up is Shelley.
Thank you. I appreciated the information that's provided today. I just want to highlight the fact that there's a number of unanswered questions, and I'd like us to, just go back through those, please. If this is a true consultation process, let's ensure all those are answered before we finish today, please.
Yep, we're working our way through the questions as fast as we can. I think we've got most of them covered, but were there any in particular you wanted covered now?
There's a couple there about have you worked out how many dairy farms in Otago will actually be affected by this consenting process? It's not been answered. And another one around stock units that's not been answered, please.
Sorry, so I just answered the one about the dairy farms. How many dairy farms? We haven't quantified that yet today.
Yeah, I think we do. I think there's about 400, I believe, dairy farms. So that is something that we're thinking of as well, like how we're going to have to manage that volume, and that might well be through transition periods as well. So
I'd venture that it's not really about the volume you've got to deal with, but about the economics of the dairy farms themselves and them knowing how they're going to be affected. Thanks.
And I think your second part of your question was there about stocking units.
Yeah, that's correct. There's a question there about the 2.5 stock unit requirement.
It was Donna, it was relating to whether it was total land area, effective land area, or to the dairy platform. My understanding is it's total area, but Delana, if you want to confirm that.
I think that is actually answered in the questions. I think it is supposed to be total area, but I don't think it has actually made it through to the FAQs. Yeah, sorry, yes it has. It's where the stocking rate is for the farm's total area, not effective area.
And just to clarify as well, that if there are any questions that are unanswered or unable to be answered in the session, we'll review the questions and the recording of the session after this, and they'll be added to the FAQs on the ORC website. So they will get answered and they will be made public. Apology, I was on mute there. Are there any other questions that anyone wants to put their hand up for or ask before we wrap up in a couple of minutes?
There's one question about, will the total area incorporate multiple land holdings? And I believe that we actually refer to the rule like the total area is one land holding. I think so. Can Felicity or Delina confirm?
Sorry, trying to answer too many questions at once. No, I don't know the answer.
We'll make sure we put that in the FAQs online, just to make sure that that's crystal clear.
Right. So the team are just working through answering the last few unanswered questions in the chat there, but I guess this is probably the last call if anyone's got any additional questions. Otherwise, I'll pass back to Fleur for our wrap up.
All right, I think I'm going to say that's probably it, but if you do have any more questions or feedback, please do put it in the chat or enter it online, but particularly the feedback. Our feedback survey will be open until the 6th of November, and so we would very much encourage you to make use of that. And you're welcome to submit on FMU specific provisions or region-wide general comments. So yeah, I did just want to say thanks so much for all your engagement and input today. It's really helpful for us to get feedback and hear about how we can make things better. And just so your interest and engagement in the plan itself. And so I'll just hand back to Lloyd if you're there to do the closing karakia.
Kia ora koutou. I think I'd just like to before we close off this, reiterate what Andrew was saying, that the plan's very much, we're in a draft form and we're really looking to get your feedback, and thank you everybody who has given feedback, and we really do encourage you to get along to one of the sessions that have been going down pretty well, where you really have the opportunity to have a really good say about what your thoughts are. And so it's just really important for us to get that feedback, and we're getting good feedback, and then that's going to inform how the plan progresses from here. And so we need it from all interested parties. But that's really good. So thank you all for your attendance, and if you do get off the call and you have another question comes to mind, just flick it to an email to one of the people, Fleur or Tom or somebody like that, and I'll always follow up. So thank you for attending, and I'll just finish the call with a karakia. Kia mutu o mātou mahi, o tēnei wā, manaki kia, ngā mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, ai o ki te arangi. Our work is finished for the moment. Peace us all, our colleagues, our families. Peace to the universe. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for your attendance. I'll leave the meeting on and open for another 5 or so minutes and then close it, which will automatically kick everybody out. But that just gives you a little bit of time for anyone left that's got any last minute questions. But other than that, thank you for your attendance.
Yes, it's Bryce McKenzie speaking. I'm not sure. I'll come on to this late. Sorry, I was at another meeting. I don't know exactly how much you've discussed about the whole plan, but I can assure you that I've had a number of messages from young people, young farmers who haven't been farming very long, and they're really struggling to know how they're going to be able to meet their commitments to debt servicing and running their properties in the future if a number of those things you've got in your plan are implemented. Have you taken any of that into consideration at this stage, or is this just a blanket what you're going to do?
So the purpose of this engagement is to find out, what what we can do better or do in a better way, and to understand better the potential impacts of what we're proposing. We're absolutely open to changing what we've got in there. But yeah, I mean, we do have requirements to meet water quality and quantity outcomes for the community. And so I guess what we're looking for is, yeah, feedback on how we can do it in a better way.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Bryce, when we started this process, or basically when we started looking at, developing the rules, and that's about well over a year ago, the starting point was to identify a number of actions that we thought farmers could do. And at that point, before we actually modeled those actions and see whether they were going to be effective, we actually applied like an economic lens over that. Like we kind of worked together with, I believe it was Ag Research, to come up with actions or requirements that actually provide like the best bang for buck, so to speak. So at that point, right at the start, we kind of looked at, picking those actions that are most cost effective, but also, get a good outcome. We've also done some economic work recently, working with the industry as well, that gives us a better understanding of what the implications are of certain rules for different industries, like farming sectors. And then also, before we notify, we're going to do an economic impact analysis as well that will look at the impacts on that. Now, it's a little bit hard because through consultation and through developing the rules keep on changing as well. So that makes it really hard to kind of say like this specific rule is going to get these impacts, because they kind of evolve all the time. And sometimes sometimes actions that made sense economically were not practical. Like some of the rules that we identified right at the start, like on and off grazing, was one of the things we thought about, and people said this is not practical for our farm. So we got rid of that, and then we need to come up with an alternative. So yeah, it's kind of a moving feast, which makes it really hard to do an economic impact assessment that covers the whole spectrum of the rules. But obviously it's something we have to do, and that we want to do as well. Because I mean, definitely we want to meet our environmental outcomes, but it's kind of important for us to kind of make sure that we look after, that we try to do that in a way that causes the least pain.
Time will tell, I guess.
All right, well, I think that's probably the last of the questions we had. So I'll close off the meeting in about 15 seconds. So it's your chance to get out gracefully before you are kicked out. But thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.